Dmitry Frolovskiy, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're here today to talk about Russia's role in the Middle East. You've written a lot recently about Russia's role in the Syrian conflict and also how that interacts with Iran. Could you possibly share some thoughts on that?
I think it's very important when we assess Russia's role in the Middle East is to look. It's in both, specifically in the context of Syria, we have to look how Russia interacts with Iran. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a profound misunderstanding to believe that Russia and Iran are actually allies.
Yeah.
Although both countries pretty much share essentially same views on each other's role within the regions when they see themselves as fixers. Mm-hmm. At the same time, both countries pursue different roles in different goals within the region. Like, for instance, Russia would like just to fit in, to squeeze in the region when it's possible to a certain influence that it didn't have for many years, while Iran is more ideological and wants to create the access of countries which are loyal to it and sort of assure protection from Israel, from the United States, or assures dominance within the Sunni-Shia struggle. And we see that because essentially there are different goals, that's why there's no collusion between them, and that allows sort of this kind of a coordination right now. But under no means could we consider that Russia and Iran are allies. I think this is a misunderstanding, and one of the keys to understanding Russia's role with Syria in Russia's long-term strategy within the region.
So, with that in mind, how do both parties, both players, fit into the current context with President Trump initially having suggested he'd pull back from Syria, then having gone back on that? With the current situation in Syria, what's Russia's role and what's Iran's role?
I would say that, again, if commenting a little bit on the Trump decision, right? I would argue that the United States wouldn't leave Syria, and it's not because I don't think that even Trump's capacity and Trump's influence is not enough to pull the United States out of it. There's a Pentagon, there's the Congress, and the United States establishment in general is very anti kind of movements that might diminish the United States' influence in Syria. And clearly, the United States will remain a powerful player within Syria and will continue to influence the context within the country and its political process as well. But if we look at Russia and Iranian role within Syria, then clearly both nations came to fix the mess that was there.
Yeah.
You could, from a certain angle, at the same time assert their influence. But at the same time, Russia's strategic interests are actually confined to Latakia and to the coastal area where it could secure its long-term military presence. At the same time, Russia understands that Iranian policy is actually, right now, Iran are actually essentially merged with Syria, with the Syrian regime, Bashar Assad. And that's why Iran is actually a dominant player within Syria. It couldn't be separated from the Syrian regime. Clearly, that imposes certain limitations on Russia's policy within the country. And although right now Russian troops are actually secure a very powerful presence in Syria, I would argue that their long-term presence will continue to diminish, while the Iranian role in the country will continue to influence. At the same time, we see that Iran is actually gaining influence throughout the establishment in Syria. It's a conversion of use of religion as a political tool, conversion of Alawites to more sort of communist ideology of Iran, and that essentially poses a long-term problem that might also trigger sectarian tensions and might ultimately spell insurgency and lead to multiple problems for Syria.
And another issue that you've done a lot of work on is the relationship between Russia and another set of regional actors, namely the GCC countries. Obviously, Russia's relationship with Qatar is very different to its relationship with, say, Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Could you tell us a bit about how that relationship currently exists and how it's changed in recent years, notably with the recent developments over the last 2 or 3 years?
Qatar right now, in Qatar's policy, is very pragmatic and it's very diversified. So Qatar wants to diversify its alliances, wants to diversify its political and economic relations, and it became much more interested in improving its relations with Russia, in particular after the blockade. I think it has to do a lot with some sort of disillusionment with the consistency of the U.S. policy in the Middle East, and specifically some actions of the current United States administration. And clearly Russia is rising power in the Middle East. It looks as an interesting actor, and by engaging in Russia, Qatar could actually get a lot of benefits. At least I'm not sure how sustainable this relationship in the long term, as well as we couldn't answer what is the Russia's end game in the region. I think it's still a mystery, not only to the actors within the region in the West and to Russia itself, but it works at this stage, so we'll see.
And so, with that in mind, is there a role that Russia can play in perhaps bringing the GCC countries closer together and more generally contributing to regional stability?
I would say that Russia will continue a pretty influential role, at least for the next few years, within the regional security balance. And that also has to do with, again, with the United States disillusionment, not only with its own policy, but with domestic and current affairs within the Middle East. But at the same time, I think the GCC, the politics in GCC are very complex. And if you look at the pattern of relations that happen between royal families or within countries, different directions, you could see that doesn't matter how powerful the actor is, it couldn't secure that much of leverage to change the vector of politics in GCC. Russia clearly tried to emerge as a broker of the GCC, what we say, clashes, like the blockade. It didn't succeed, and I don't think it's going to succeed. It will attempt. It will clearly try to reach out more to the royal families across the GCC, but I think its leverage is pretty limited, and I don't think it's really capable to do it. And I don't think anybody capable. I think it's up to GCCs to decide, and up to politics that probably happen behind closed doors that we don't know about.
Well, thank you so much.